Chapter 13. A Giggle Box, a Leaky Faucet, and a Foghorn. Every day after lunch, Mrs. Jules read a story to the class. Dana hated stories. The last book Mrs. Jules had read was a story about a pig and spider. The pig was real cute and the spider was very wise. Dana thought it was a horrible book. It made her laugh too much. Everyone else laughed too, but the problem was that Dana always kept laughing long after everyone else in the class had stopped. It was very embarrassing. And sometimes she broke out laughing at a part that wasn't even funny because she remembered something funny that had happened earlier. John called her a giggle box. That only made her laugh harder. Once, she broke up laughing in the middle of an arithmetic test because she remembered something funny the pig had said. "There goes the giggle box," said John. She hated John. But that wasn't the worst part of the book. In the end, the spider died. Dana couldn't stop crying, and she thought it was so silly, too, because in real life, she didn't even like spiders. She squashed them all the time. John called her a leaky faucet. "Somebody better call a plumber to fix the leaky faucet," he said. She laughed through her tears. She hated John. Once in music, they had learned a song about a dragon. When the song begins, the dragon is very brave, but then he loses his only friend, so he isn't brave anymore. He just goes back to his cave, where he is sad and lonely for the rest of his life. The song always made Dana cry. Every recess, John and Joe would chase after her, singing it. She'd run across the playground with her hands over her ears and tears streaming down her face. The bell rang. Lunch was over. Dana nervously walked up the stairs to Mrs. Jules's room. Mrs. Jules would start a new book today. She hoped it wouldn't be funny or sad. She hoped Mrs. Jules would read a boring story with no jokes. When she got to class, John and Joe were standing by her desk, waiting for her. "Happy birthday, Dana," said John. He was holding a present. It was wrapped in green paper and had a pink bow. "But it's not my birthday," said Dana. "Well, that's okay," said John. "You can have it anyway, since I'm always teasing you." He and Joe snickered. Dana eagerly tore off the wrapping paper. Maybe John wasn't so bad after all, she thought. It was a box of tissues. John and Joe laughed hysterically. "That's not funny," said Dana. She raised her fist and started to chase after them. Mrs. Jules rang her cowbell and all the children settled quietly in their seats. "We are ready to begin a new story," said Mrs. Jules. She held up the book. "It's called Stinky." Dana laughed at the title, then quickly covered her mouth. "It's about a cute and playful skunk," said Mrs. Jules. "Oh no," gasped Dana. She knew animal stories always made her cry. The animal's mother would get shot by human hunters, or else humans would build a shopping center and destroy the animal's home. She hated humans. But she knew that was silly because she was a human, and so were all her friends. The only human she really hated was John, and she didn't think he was even human. Mrs. Jules read, "It was a beautiful day. Stinky and his mother went for a walk across the street." "Hi, Stinky," said Charlie the chipmunk. "Hi, Charlie," said Stinky. "Come along, Stinky," called his mother. Stinky hurried after her. They came to a road. Suddenly, Stinky heard a noise he had never heard before. It was very loud, like thunder. A car driven by humans was speeding toward him. "Look out!" shouted his mother. Stinky stopped in the middle of the road and stared at the onrushing car. He had never seen a car before. His mother pushed him out of the way just in time. He was safe, but unfortunately, the car ran over his mother. "Mama, Mama," he sobbed over and over again, but his mother didn't answer. She was dead. Dana cried. "Uh-oh, there goes the leaky faucet," said John. He and Joe laughed. Dana sniffled and wiped her eyes, but the tears wouldn't stop. She just kept thinking about poor Stinky. What would he do without his mother, she wondered. Maybe he could go live with Charlie the Chipmunk, she hoped. She pulled a tissue out of the box John had given her and loudly blew her nose. There goes the foghorn, said John. Dana laughed into her tissue. She blew her nose again, even louder. It must be a very foggy day, said John. The next day after lunch, Dana hurried up the 30 flights of stairs before the bell rang so she could talk to Mrs. Jules before class started. Yes, Dana, said Mrs. Jules. Can I leave the room when you read today? Asked Dana. Why? Asked Mrs. Jules. Because I hate stories, said Dana. They make me laugh and cry too much. You don't hate stories, Dana, Mrs. Jules told her. You love stories. I wish everybody laughed and cried as much as you. Really? Asked Dana. She couldn't believe it. All this time she thought she hated stories when she really loved them. She was glad she loved stories. Suddenly she made a face. Oh, yuck, she said. What is it? Asked Mrs. Jules. What if I really love John too? Chapter 14. It was Calvin's birthday. His mother had made him chocolate cupcakes with jelly beans on top. Mrs. Jules passed them out to the class. Hey, Dana, said Leslie, I'll trade you my black jelly bean for your red one. Okay, said Dana. Everyone traded jelly beans. That was the most fun part of the party. Bebe was very excited. Tell everybody what you're getting for your birthday, Calvin, she said. I don't know, Calvin mumbled as he stared at his yellow jelly bean. He's getting the best present, said Bebe. What are you getting, Calvin? Asked Mrs. Jules. Calvin frowned. I don't know, he griped. I know what it is, but I don't know what it is. Huh? Asked Jason. See, I usually get toys, Calvin tried to explain, but they always break or get lost or something happens to them. But this year, I'm getting something I'll never lose, and I'll have it for the rest of my life. What is it? Asked Terrence. A tattoo, said Calvin. Oh, how neat, exclaimed Mauricia. Everyone thought it was a great present. You're so lucky, Calvin, said Rondi. I wish I could get a tattoo, too. Instead, I got a tutu. I got a tutu, too, said Dana. My parents won't let me get a tattoo, complained John. My parents wouldn't let me get one either, said Calvin. Then, for my birthday, they said I could get one. But now I can't decide what to get. My dad's taking me to a tattoo parlor after school today. I just can't make up my mind. Get a snake, said Stephen. No, get an eagle, said Dee Dee. They're the best. A dead rat, suggested Kathy. I just don't know, said Calvin. I've never had to make such a tough decision. Nothing else I do matters very much. It's not like choosing jelly beans. If you pick the wrong color jelly bean, big deal. You can always spit it out. But once you get a tattoo, you can't change your mind. You can't erase tattoos. Whatever I get, I'll have it for the rest of my life. I just don't know. Where are you going to put your tattoo? Asked Allison. Calvin threw up his hands. I don't know. You should put it on your arm, said Myron. That's the best place for tattoos. You're crazy, Myron, said Todd. Put it on your chest, Calvin. I know where you should put it, said Dana. But I can't say. She giggled like a maniac. Then she whispered it in Jenny's ear. Jenny giggled too. All day, everyone had lots of suggestions for Calvin. They told him what kind of tattoo he should get and where he should put it. A rainbow on his forehead, a flower on his cheek, an anchor on his arm. It was easy for the kids to make suggestions. They wouldn't have to live with it for the rest of their lives. I just don't know, Calvin repeated over and over again. Bebe drew a lot of pictures for him in case he wanted to choose one of those. She drew lions, tigers, buffaloes, and butterflies. If you like one, I can draw it on your skin for you, said Bebe. Then the tattoo man can trace over it. I just don't know, muttered Calvin. I just don't know. After school, Calvin's father picked him up and drove him to the tattoo parlor. The next day, when he walked into class, everybody stared at him. They couldn't see a tattoo. Did you get one? Asked Mauricia. Calvin smiled. Yep. he said. Where is it? Asked Jason. Dana gasped. I know where, she exclaimed. She and Jenny giggled. Well, what'd you get? Asked Todd. It was a real tough decision, said Calvin. I almost got a leopard fighting a snake, but then my dad told me to think about it. He said it was sort of like getting a second nose. You may think you want another nose, because that way, if one nose gets stuffed up, you can breathe through the other nose. But then he asked me, Calvin, do you really want two noses? Your father is very wise, said Mrs. Jules. Calvin nodded. That made me think, he said. I decided I didn't want a snake and a leopard fighting on my body for the rest of my life. I suddenly knew exactly what I wanted. He pulled up his left pant leg. There was a small tattoo just above his ankle. Everyone crowded around to look at it. A potato? Exclaimed Leslie. How stupid! That's the worst tattoo in the world, said Mac. They all thought it was a dumb tattoo. Anything is better than a potato, said Jason. It's a pretty potato, said Bebe, trying to be nice. I wish I could draw potatoes that good. But even Bebe thought it was a dumb tattoo. I like potatoes, said Calvin. I would hope so, said Mrs. Jules. Calvin could tell Mrs. Jules didn't like his tattoo either. I would have gotten an eagle, said Dee Dee, soaring across the sky. Not me, said Terence. I would have gotten a lion. I would have gotten a kangaroo, said Leslie. All day, everyone told Calvin what they would have gotten. A fire-breathing dragon, a lightning bolt, a creature from outer space. None of them said they would have gotten a potato. But Calvin knew better. He knew it was easy for his friends to say what they would have gotten because they really hadn't had to choose. He was the only one who really knew what it was like to pick a tattoo. Even Mrs. Jules didn't know that. He looked at his potato. He smiled. It made him happy. He was sure he had made the right choice. At least he was pretty sure. Chapter 15. She's back. Dee Dee ran across the playground screaming. At first, Louis thought she was just having fun, but then he realized something was wrong. He hurried after her and grabbed her arm. Dee Dee, are you all right? He asked. She stared at him wide-eyed as she continued to scream. Several other kids gathered around. What's wrong with you, Dee Dee? Asked Myron. I don't know, said Louis. Dee Dee hiccuped 3 times, then gasped. I saw her. Who? Asked Louis. Dee Dee didn't answer. She just stared right through him. But everyone else knew whom Dee Dee had seen. Most of them had seen her too during the last 2 weeks. Where was she? Asked Todd. On the monkey bars, said Dee Dee, still trembling and breathing hard. I was hanging upside down, and suddenly she was hanging upside down right next to me. Did she wiggle her ears? Asked Jenny. Only one, said Dee Dee. I jumped off and ran away before she could wiggle the other one. Well, that's good, said Rondi. Who is she? Asked Louis. A hippopotamus? No, said Myron with a laugh. Why do you say that? Because when a hippopotamus gets mad, it wiggles its ears. She's worse than a hippopotamus, said Allison. I saw her last week at the water fountain, said Todd. I bent down to get a drink, and there she was, drinking at the faucet next to me. I saw her on the stairs, said Rondi. I was going up the stairs, and she went right past me, sliding down on the banister. Who? Asked Louis. Mrs. Gorf, said Dee Dee. Just saying the name sent a shiver of fear through her body. Oh, your old teacher, said Louis with a shrug. Is she back? I always wondered what happened to her. The children looked at each other. Mrs. Gorf was the teacher they had had before Mrs. Jules took over. They had never told anyone how they had gotten rid of her. They especially couldn't tell Louis. She was the meanest teacher in the history of Wayside School. Of course, there are other teachers at other schools who are meaner. Louis looked toward the monkey bars. I don't see her, he said. Well, she was there, Dee Dee insisted. I saw her. You just imagined you saw her, Dee Dee, said Louis. If you hate somebody or if you love somebody, you often think you see that person when she isn't there. It's very common. It's just like Mrs. Drazel. Who's Mrs. Drazel? Asked Todd. She was the worst teacher I ever had, said Louis. He shivered just thinking about her. She was my teacher when I was your age. I sometimes think I see her too, and I still have nightmares about her. Was she mean? Asked Rondi. She was horrible, said Louis. Every morning she used to check our fingernails. If they were dirty, she'd tell the whole class. Louis has dirty fingernails this morning, she'd say in a real nasty voice. And if you talked in class, she would pick up the waste paper basket and put it over your head. You had to leave it on your head until the bell rang. Did she ever put it over your head? Asked Todd. Lots of times, said Louis. Everybody laughed. It wasn't funny, said Louis. My mother always knew when I got in trouble because I'd have bits of trash stuck in my hair. Did it get stuck in your mustache too? Asked Rondi. Louis didn't have a mustache when he was our age, said Allison. Did you, Louis? She asked. Suddenly, Louis screamed. Everyone stared at him. She's back, he shouted as he shook with fear. Then he slapped himself in the face. Excuse me, he said. Sorry. For a second, I thought I saw Mrs. Drazel. He turned to Dee Dee. Come on, let's go to the monkey bars. No, declared Dee Dee. I'm not going back. I'm never going on the monkey bars again. Louis took hold of her hand. Mrs. Gorf isn't there, he said. You just imagined her. They headed to the monkey bars. No one else dared to follow. If she starts to wiggle her ears, run away as fast as you can, warned Dee Dee. She held tightly onto Louis's hand. When they reached the monkey bars, no one was there. Where were you when you saw her? Louis asked. I was hanging upside down over there, said Dee Dee, pointing. Okay, go hang upside down, said Louis. No, exclaimed Dee Dee. Don't worry, I'll be right here in case anything happens. It had rained during the night, so the sand under the monkey bars was wet and somewhat hard. Dee Dee walked across the sand and pulled herself up on the bar. She hooked her legs over, then hung from her knees. Well, do you see her? Louis asked. No, it's safe now, said Dee Dee. Thanks, Louis. I guess you're right. I must have seen my shadow or something. Dee Dee pulled herself right side up, then hopped down from the monkey bars. She and Louis walked away hand in hand. She held Louis's hand, not because she was scared, but because she liked him. Mrs. Drazel sounds almost as bad as Mrs. Gorf, said Dee Dee. She was, said Louis. She once made me put gum on my nose because I was chewing it in class. How can you chew your nose? Asked Dee Dee. Behind them, Dee Dee's footprints could be seen in the wet sand under the monkey bars. There was also another set of footprints, made by a person who had much bigger feet.